The engagement ring hit the wooden porch floor and spun in a slow, trembling circle before collapsing into silence between them. The sound was small, almost fragile, but it echoed louder than any scream could have. Marcus felt it in his chest like something breaking loose. Across from him, Vanessa sat very still on the porch swing of her lakefront mansion outside Seattle, her fingers pressed lightly to her temple, as if holding her thoughts together by force. In that moment, nothing about the glittering water behind her or the sprawling estate mattered. It was just a man, a woman, and a choice that would carve their lives in two. And if you were standing where Marcus stood, staring at everything you could gain and everything you could lose at the same time, what would you do? Marcus hadn't always been the kind of man who turned down security. 3 years earlier, he had buried his wife, Hannah, in a small cemetery in Spokane, beneath a gray Washington sky that seemed determined never to clear. He had stood there holding the tiny hand of his 5-year-old son, Caleb, promising a future he had no idea how to build. Hospital bills swallowed his savings. The auto repair shop where he worked cut his hours. Nights became a blur of microwaved dinners, homework battles, and the quiet, crushing loneliness that only hit once Caleb was asleep. Vanessa entered his life like a world he didn't believe he deserved. They met at a charity event he attended reluctantly after fixing a vintage Mustang for one of her company's executives. She was nothing like the tabloids painted her, no cold steel in her eyes, no arrogance dripping from her words. She listened when he spoke about engines and about Caleb. She asked about Hannah without flinching at the grief that still clung to his sentences. Vanessa had inherited and expanded a tech empire built by her father, turning it into a billion-dollar powerhouse headquartered in downtown Seattle. Yet when she looked at Marcus, she looked like a woman starving for something money could not buy. Their worlds clashed gently at first. Marcus would drive his old pickup through the iron gates of her estate, feeling like an imposter among the marble floors and modern art. Vanessa, on the other hand, found quiet relief in his small rental house with mismatched furniture and crayon drawings taped to the fridge. Caleb adored her. She never tried to replace his mother. She simply showed up, at school plays, at soccer games, on nights when nightmares woke him. But love, Marcus learned, does not erase insecurity. The whispers began slowly. Vanessa's board members questioned her judgment. Friends hinted that Marcus was lucky. Strangers assumed he had calculated every step. Even at charity galas, he felt the weight of tailored suits and polished smiles measuring him. He started noticing how often he reached for his wallet in restaurants, only for Vanessa's assistant to quietly settle the bill before he could blink. Pride is a quiet, stubborn thing. It doesn't shout. It just sits in your chest and refuses to move. The real fracture came the night Caleb asked a question that Marcus couldn't ignore. They were sitting on the couch after visiting Vanessa's penthouse in the city. Caleb had been unusually quiet. Finally, he looked up and asked if they would have to move into Vanessa's big house forever, and if that meant Daddy wouldn't fix cars anymore. The innocence in his voice cut deep. Marcus saw fear there, not of Vanessa, but of losing the version of his father he understood. What if Caleb grew up feeling like an accessory in someone else's empire? What if Marcus slowly disappeared behind Vanessa's wealth? Marcus began pulling away. He skipped events. He insisted on paying for things he couldn't afford. He turned down Vanessa's offer to invest in his own repair shop because it felt too much like charity. Vanessa tried to reassure him that love was not a transaction, but the more she reached out, the more he retreated. He convinced himself he was protecting his son, protecting his pride, protecting the fragile independence that was all he had left after losing Hannah. So that evening on the porch, with the lake glowing gold in the setting sun, Marcus told Vanessa he couldn't do it anymore. He said he didn't belong in her world. He said Caleb deserved a simple life, not one tangled in headlines and expectations. His voice trembled, but he forced the words out anyway. The ring slipped from his fingers and hit the floor. Vanessa didn't cry at first. She simply stared at the ring, then at him, as if memorizing the lines of his face. The silence stretched until it felt unbearable. Finally, she asked him one question, her voice so soft it almost disappeared into the breeze. She asked whether he was leaving because he truly didn't love her enough, or because he was too afraid to let someone love him without earning it. The question shattered something inside him. It wasn't accusatory. It wasn't angry. It was honest. Marcus realized he had spent his entire life believing love had to be paid for, with hard work, with sacrifice, with self-denial. Hannah had loved him when they had nothing. Vanessa loved him now, even when he had nothing to offer her financially. Yet he kept measuring himself against a scale she had never placed in front of him. He drove home that night in a fog. Caleb was asleep in the backseat, his small head tilted against the window. Marcus thought about the years ahead. He imagined raising Caleb alone, teaching him to fix engines, to be strong and self-reliant. But he also imagined teaching him that love must always be negotiated, that pride is more important than partnership. Was that the lesson he wanted his son to carry? For days, Marcus avoided Vanessa's calls. Then one afternoon, Caleb came home from school with a drawing. It was of the three of them standing together in front of a house. Above their stick-figure heads, Caleb had written, "My family." Marcus felt his throat close. Children have a way of seeing truth adults try to complicate. He drove back to the lake house before he could talk himself out of it. The gates were open. Vanessa was on the porch again, alone, staring at the water. She looked smaller somehow, not because her wealth had vanished, but because heartbreak levels everyone. Marcus didn't have a grand speech prepared. He only had honesty. He told her he was terrified, not of her money, but of failing in a world he didn't understand. He admitted that her question had forced him to confront his own fear of being loved without conditions. Vanessa listened, tears finally slipping down her cheeks. She told him she never wanted to rescue him. She wanted to build something with him. She had already drafted plans to fund community auto shops in underserved neighborhoods, not as charity but as partnerships, with Marcus leading them. She didn't want to change who he was. She wanted to amplify it. Standing there, Marcus understood that leaving would have been the easy way to protect his pride. Staying required vulnerability. It required trusting that love could exist without imbalance. He picked up the ring from where it still rested on the small porch table, as if waiting patiently. This time, when he slipped it onto her finger, it felt less like a surrender and more like a promise made between equals. Years later, the headlines did come, but they didn't define them. Marcus opened 3 community garages across Washington, creating jobs for single parents who once stood where he had stood. Vanessa continued running her company, but she spent more evenings at soccer fields than boardrooms. Caleb grew up seeing a man who chose love not because it was easy, but because it was brave. And sometimes, on quiet evenings by the lake, Marcus would think back to that spinning ring on the porch floor and shudder at how close he had come to letting fear win. One question had nearly ended everything. One honest answer had rebuilt it. Before this story closes, tell me in the comments what you would have done if you were in Marcus's place, torn between pride and love. If this story truly touched your heart, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Only if it reminded you that sometimes the hardest choice is simply allowing yourself to be loved.